The arrival. Brody Kincaid ripped the rifle from Cora's hands and slammed it against the concrete floor. The sharp crack of old wood echoed through the cavernous armory.
"Take that antique piece of garbage back to the museum," he barked, his voice carrying to every man in the room. "This is a Navy SEAL competition, not a history lesson."
Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Cora stared down at her father's rifle. This was the weapon that had survived the jungles of Vietnam, that had outlasted a war soaked in blood and history, now lying on the cold concrete, scratched and humiliated. Slowly, she lifted her gaze to meet Brody's and offered a quiet smile. That smile terrified him more than anything he had ever faced in combat. A quick note from the storyteller. Subscribe to this channel and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far Cora's story reaches. The bus pulled into Naval Air Weapons Station China Lake early in the morning. Captain Cora Hayes was the last one to step off, not because she was slow, but because she had learned long ago that the way you enter a room tells people everything they need to know about whether you're afraid of them. She wasn't. She stepped onto the tarmac with her duffel bag slung over one shoulder and her father's rifle case tucked under her left arm, carrying it as if it weighed nothing. In truth, it weighed far more than anyone could realize. Its weight wasn't measured in pounds, but in blood, in sacrifice, and in everything a man had endured through the jungles of Vietnam, just so that one day his daughter could carry it here. The heat hit her instantly. It was that relentless, honest California desert heat, the kind that radiates up from the concrete and beats down from above, offering no mercy and making no apologies. Cora had grown up in Montana, where the biting cold possessed the same brutal character. She respected them both. What she didn't respect was the palpable shift in the air the moment she cleared the bottom step and the other men on the tarmac turned to look at her. It wasn't exactly surprise. Word had already traveled. These were elite operators, Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Force Recon Marines, and one Delta Force sergeant whose name wasn't supposed to exist on any public roster. They were men who built their careers on intelligence, on knowing what was coming long before it arrived. They already knew a woman had been cleared for the tournament. But knowing a fact and witnessing it in the flesh are two entirely different animals. The SEALs stared. Not all of it was hostility. Some eyes held genuine curiosity, which was almost worse because curiosity can sour into hatred much faster. The Rangers near the equipment shed stopped mid-sentence. One muttered something low, and the rest laughed. Cora didn't need to hear the words. She had heard that exact laugh her entire career. It sounded the same in every language, on every base, in every country she had ever deployed to. She kept walking. Chief Warrant Officer Wyatt Thorne, the competition's logistics coordinator, waited by the check-in tables with a clipboard and a tight expression that suggested he had drawn the short straw for the day. He was a stocky, middle-aged man with a sun-baked neck and eyes that were constantly calculating. "Captain Hayes," he greeted explicitly, keeping his hands at his sides. "Welcome to China Lake." "Thank you, Chief Thorne. I'll need to submit my weapon for inspection and calibration." Cora set her case on the table and unlatched it without ceremony. Inside, wrapped meticulously in oiled cloth, just as her father had taught her before she was even old enough for grade school, lay the M14. The action was worn smooth from generations of handling. The wooden stock bore a hairline crack near the pistol grip, repaired so many times that the mending itself had become part of the rifle's soul. It was a weapon that had survived one war only to be maintained through another lifetime of strict discipline and profound love. Thorne stared at it. He looked at Cora, then back at the rifle. "This is your competition weapon?" "Yes." "Captain, the tournament specification allows for..." I know what the specification allows, Cora interrupted softly. That was another lesson from her father. The quieter you speak, the harder people have to lean in to hear you. And the moment someone leans in, you have their absolute attention. The specification allows personal weapons that meet minimum caliber and action requirements, she continued. The M14 qualifies. Thorne scribbled something onto his clipboard. His pen moved with the distinct nervous energy of a man documenting details solely so he could later claim that none of this had been his idea. You'll receive your scope assignment at the armory, he muttered. Bay 4. The armory. As Cora approached Bay 4, she heard it the specific kind of laughter that cuts off the second you enter a room, but doesn't actually die. It just burrows underground, morphing into smirks and exchanged glances. Two younger SEAL operators loitered by the window. Behind the counter stood the armory sergeant and a lean man named Decker, both wearing the strained expressions of men who had been handed dirty orders and felt no pride in executing them. Her assigned scope sat on the table. Cora stared at it in silence. The AN/P VS-10 night vision optic had been standard military issue decades past. The rubber eye cup was severely cracked. The mounting brackets had been shimmed with what looked like folded aluminum foil. When Decker slid it across the table and Cora held it up to the light, she found a spiderweb fracture deep in the interior lens element. It turned the entire field of view into a fragmented, useless kaleidoscope. The two SEALs near the window weren't laughing out loud. They were better trained than that. But one had a hand clapped over his mouth, failing to hide his grin. This is my assigned optic, Cora stated flatly. Decker met her eyes for a fleeting second. That's what came down from the equipment office, Captain. Cora set the broken scope on the table. She rotated her M14 slightly. With practiced hands moving purely on deep muscle memory, she unscrewed the broken mount completely. 3 screws, a quick twist of the base ring, and the heavy optic came free. She set it gently beside the case. Beneath it sat the M14's original iron sights, resting exactly where they had always been. Front post, rear aperture. Simple. Honest. Old. One of the operators behind her inhaled sharply. Are you serious? The other whispered, barely under his breath. Cora picked up her rifle, checked the chamber, dry-fired once against the wall to feel the crisp break of the trigger, and turned back to Decker. Is there anything else I need to sign? He was staring blankly at the iron sights. No, ma'am. Then I'll see you at the range. She stepped back out into the blistering California sun. By the time she reached the competitors' barracks, the story was already spreading like wildfire. 3 different men had their phones out, not making calls since service was highly restricted, but simply out of sheer human habit. When something shocks a person to their core, they instinctively reach for a way to tell someone. The barracks. The barracks were a long concrete structure divided into individual rooms, each no larger than a generous closet. Cora's quarters were at the absolute far end of the hall. She walked past door after door, giving numerous men the opportunity to watch her pass. Some doors were open, others closed. One man immediately returned to cleaning his rifle without acknowledging her, which was ironically the most respectful reaction she received. Another nodded politely. 3 openly stared. 2 masked their expressions perfectly, wearing the carefully neutral faces of men trained to conceal their contempt. Her room offered a cot, a metal locker, and a window facing the firing range. She set the case on the cot and began to unpack with systematic efficiency. Having done this in dozens of hostile environments, she knew that you sleep better when your gear is strictly organized before your head hits the pillow. Through the thin concrete walls, she heard the door next to hers open and close. Voices murmured. Having spent years in forward operating bases, Cora knew that thin walls weren't barriers. They were merely the illusion of privacy. She brought iron sights. It was a younger, irritated voice. I saw, a second older voice replied. His cadence was measured, the sound of a man who had served long enough to know the value of choosing his words carefully.
Iron sights, Marcus, iron sights to a tournament where guys are running top-tier Night Force optics.
I heard you the first time, Brody. It's embarrassing for everyone, Brody pushed. She's going to go out there and miss every target past the mid-range mark, and it's going to look like they let her in as some kind of diversity stunt. She knows something you don't, Marcus countered. The calm authority in his tone was something the younger man clearly hadn't earned yet. A scoff. With iron sights? At extreme distances? Come on. You know who the last person I saw shoot iron sights at long range was. Who? My grandfather. Mine too, Marcus replied quietly. Quezon during the war. He talked about it my whole childhood. He said the Marines who made it back were the ones who learned to trust the iron and not the glass, because glass could break. The iron was always there. A pause stretched between the rooms. That's a Vietnam story, Brody muttered. Yeah, Marcus said softly. It is. Cora finished her unpacking. She sat on the edge of the stiff cot, her eyes resting on the rifle case, and allowed herself the rare, quiet luxury of a memory. She felt her father's rugged hands wrapped entirely over hers, standing in the bitter Montana cold before dawn. Frost glazed the tall grass, their breath misting heavily in the air. He was teaching her to feel the wind long before she ever tried to measure it. She was the instrument. The rifle was merely a tool she happened to hold. Her father had drilled that into her so relentlessly that she could hear his deep voice vibrating in this concrete room in California years after his passing. She didn't shed a tear. She hadn't cried over her father in a very long time. It wasn't a lack of grief. She mourned him every single day, her sorrow so tightly woven into the ordinary fabric of her life that the two were indistinguishable. But she didn't honor his memory with tears. She honored him with performance. She lay back on the cot, closed her eyes, and slipped into a deep sleep in mere minutes. The first shots. The competition briefing commenced the following morning in a low-ceilinged room reeking of industrial bleach and stale coffee. Competitors sat in folding chairs. Cora occupied the third row, acutely aware, without having to look around, that she was the only woman present. It was a shared, unspoken variable in the atmosphere, heavy, regardless of whether anyone acknowledged it out loud. Commander Harrison Vance stood at the front. Cora had read his file, or at least the sanitized version available at her clearance level. Even the public record was intimidating. Multiple combat deployments as a sniper, 2 distinguished service medals, and a Silver Star from Fallujah, described in bloodless official terminology that utterly failed to capture the nightmare the men on the ground had spoken of. He was an older man, yet he moved with the liquid grace of someone decades younger, the hallmark of a soldier who had never stopped training. He scanned the room. His eyes passed over Cora exactly the way they passed over everyone else. In this environment, that level of neutrality was remarkable. Welcome to the Senior Sniper Invitational, Vance began. You're here because someone reviewed your jacket and decided you were worth the cost of the plane ticket. Whether they were right is what the upcoming days will determine. He paused, letting the silence stretch. I want to make one thing perfectly clear before we discuss the structure. This is not a technology exhibition. The military has entirely different venues for that. This is a marksmanship competition. If you cannot make a shot without your equipment holding your hand and feeding you the math, you are going to bleed out here. He didn't look at anyone specifically. He didn't need to. Vance outlined the grueling schedule. Daily qualification phases, escalating scored challenges, and a strict elimination protocol for failures. Questions? Lieutenant Brody Kincaid, seated in the front row, raised his hand with the distinct swagger of a man who didn't actually need an answer, but desperately needed an audience. Commander, the equipment roster shows standard issue across the board. However, I'm seeing at least one competitor running a non-standard setup. Iron sights, specifically. Is there a waiver process we should be aware of, just in case the rest of us want to downgrade and simplify our loadouts? The smirk in his voice was subtle, but the men around him caught it perfectly. Vance stared at Brody, his expression impassive. There is no waiver required for iron sights, he stated coldly. Iron sights are legal. Iron sights are traditional. Iron sights have won wars. He shifted his gaze. Next question. Brody sank back into his chair. He stubbornly refused to look in Cora's direction, a calculated, aggressive form of contempt designed to strip its target of even basic acknowledgement. Cora kept her eyes locked straight ahead. After the briefing, as the competitors filed out toward the staging area, a heavy hand gently brushed Cora's elbow. She turned to find Master Sergeant Marcus Cole. He was a powerfully built black man with closely cropped gray hair at his temples. His physique wasn't forged in a mirror. It was the dense, functional muscle of a career soldier. His eyes revealed very little the defense mechanism of a man who had witnessed horrors and learned to lock his soul behind a vault. Cole, he introduced himself. Army. Not looking to say anything profound, just figured someone ought to introduce themselves like a human being. She shook his hand firmly. Hayes, Marines. I know, Marcus replied. Read your jacket. 3 brutal deployments. Fallujah, Ramadi, Kandahar. Your hit rate in Kandahar was... He trailed off, shaking his head slightly. Unusual. The elevation helps, Cora offered smoothly. You learn to compensate quite differently when the air runs thin. He nodded, his gaze drifting to her weapon. Iron sights. Iron sights. Marcus studied her face. A ghost of a smile flickered at the edge of his mouth. My grandfather was a caisson. I know, she replied gently. I read your jacket too. They walked out to the sun-baked range side by side. Trailing behind them, Cora could feel the distinct, heavy silence of a room forcefully recalibrating its assumptions. The baseline. The first qualification phase was a standard standing to prone series. A wide array of targets stretched far into the distance, allowing only a brief window per target scored strictly on ring value. It was a baseline test, engineered to expose anyone who had inflated their resume. Under these calm conditions, and with premium glass, an elite operator was expected to score near perfection. Cora took Lane 7. Brody Kincaid was assigned to Lane 6, placing her performance directly in his peripheral vision. Whether it was coincidental or maliciously intentional, Cora didn't care. She didn't waste her energy on the question. She dropped into the prone position, nested the rifle tight against her shoulder, and took 3 agonizingly slow breaths to force her heart rate down into a cold, rhythmic crawl. It was a resting pulse that most civilians required heavy medication to reach, forged by her through lifelong discipline. She peered through the rear aperture. The first target was tiny, far smaller than it appeared to a shooter unaccustomed to reading raw iron across vast distances. The rear ring framed the world. The front post sat dead center. She exhaled entirely, found that magical, weightless, respiratory pause that lingers between an exhale and the inevitable inhale, and squeezed the trigger. The shot broke beautifully. She cycled the bolt and snapped to the second target without bothering to spot her hit. You didn't need to check. Either you executed the fundamentals perfectly, or you didn't. Staring through the glass afterward wouldn't change reality. Shot 2 clean. Beside her, she heard Brody settling in. The unmistakable, expensive clicks of his scope's adjustable turrets rang out as he dialed his atmospheric math. His first shot fired shortly after hers. The scoring officer yelled out his value, a 9. Excellent, but not flawless. Cora's third shot cracked. 10! Center! The official called. Up on the observation deck, someone audibly let out a breath.
Shot 456.
Each one fired in the exact, unyielding rhythm she had perfected as a young girl, in a frozen Montana field, with her father standing over her shoulder, quietly counting her breaths. Every single shot rang out as a 9 or a 10. Each impact fed the low, buzzing conversation sparking to life on the observation deck above. Shot 12 fundamentally altered the atmosphere on the range. At that extreme mid-range distance, iron sights afford exactly zero margin for error. The front post appears as wide as a small coin covering the target. The wind had picked up a deceptive crosswind, felt on the skin rather than measured by anemometers. Cora felt the shift. She held her breath, waited for the gust to soften for a fraction of a second, and broke the shot directly through that tiny window. 10. Center. Someone on the observation deck cursed softly. Then dead silence. In lane 6, Brody had stopped firing. Cora sensed it the way one senses a sudden vacuum in a noisy room. His rhythmic firing pattern had abruptly died. She didn't turn her head, but she knew. He was watching her. As the distances stretched further, the crosswind grew fierce, shifting its angle constantly. Cora had been subconsciously cataloging the wind's behavior patterns since she hit the dirt. She adjusted her hold purely by shifting the physical alignment of her front post against the target's blurry edge. No turrets, no dials, just raw geometry. The rifle roared. 10. Center. The rangemaster, a grizzled, deeply cynical chief petty officer named Holden, who had run qualification boards for years and possessed the emotional bandwidth of a brick wall, stared downrange. He let 3 full seconds of silence hang in the air before muttering to no one in particular. Cora fired her final shot. 10. Center. She cleared the hot chamber, clicked the safety on, and stood up smoothly. The scoring officer walked the line to collect the data cards. When he reached Cora, he stared at her card for an uncomfortably long moment. Perfect score, he murmured, not announcing it to the crowd, but speaking with the hushed reverence of a man encountering a myth he had been told didn't exist. Cora realized the observation deck above had gone completely silent. Out of deeply ingrained threat assessment habits, always know what occupies the high ground, she glanced up. Commander Vance was standing at the railing, staring down at her. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't frowning. He was analyzing her with the intense focus of a man who needed time to comprehend what he had just witnessed. Slowly he raised his binoculars and turned his attention back downrange. That was enough. The undercurrents. During the midday meal, the mess hall seating chart painted a vivid picture of the base's internal politics. Cora carried her tray to an empty table by the windows, and the crowd unconsciously parted to give her a wide berth, the exact spatial reaction humans have to an apex predator they haven't quite figured out how to classify yet. Eventually, Marcus Cole sat across from her. 2 younger rangers, blissfully ignorant of the simmering drama, took seats nearby. But the vast majority of the room kept their distance. At the center table, Brody was holding court with a clique of SEALs. He was speaking loudly, deliberately broadcasting his damage control. Cora caught fragments of his aggressive cope drifting over the clatter of silverware. Beginner's luck. Wait until the moving targets drop. Static wind is a joke. Marcus chewed his food mechanically. He's going to be a massive problem. He was already a problem, Cora replied softly. He just lacked a specific reason to act out. Now he feels he has one. Marcus studied her. There's a significant difference. A massive difference, Cora agreed. A problem without a reason is just ambient noise. A problem with a reason starts making tactical moves. That's the exact moment you find out what the men around you are truly made of. Marcus absorbed the philosophy. Your father teach you that. Cora looked up, meeting his eyes. My father taught me absolutely everything worth knowing. The rest of my education came from being the only woman trapped in rooms full of men who desperately wanted me gone. He nodded slowly. Sounds like a hell of an education. They ate in comfortable silence before Cora spoke again, her eyes fixed entirely on her tray. Someone tossed my equipment locker last night. Marcus's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Nothing was stolen, she clarified smoothly. Nothing was permanently damaged, just slightly displaced. It was incredibly subtle, the kind of tampering designed to look like accidental shifting. But I pack my gear in a highly specific mathematical sequence, and that sequence was broken. Are you certain? I'm certain. Did you report it? Cora looked at him. There was zero bitterness in her voice, only the flat, deadened reality of a woman who already knew the punchline to her own joke. To whom? Marcus fell silent. He set his fork down. I'll keep my eyes open. I know you will. That's exactly why I told you. Across the mess hall, Brody delivered a punchline that sent his entire table into roaring laughter. Cora didn't even flinch. She finished her meal, cleared her tray, and walked right back out into the blistering heat to prepare for the afternoon trials. She could feel the weight of 50 pairs of eyes burning into her spine as she left. She had navigated that exact gaze her entire life. Her father had taught her the ultimate countermeasure. You never, ever let them dictate your speed. You walk at the exact pace you intended to walk, because the second you speed up or slow down for an audience, you surrender a piece of your soul you will never get back. She held her pace perfectly. The moving targets. The afternoon trial was a chaotic, timed nightmare. Silhouettes popped up at totally randomized, mixed distances, remaining visible for mere seconds before vanishing into the dirt. A shooter had to acquire, calculate the extreme ballistics, and fire perfectly within that tiny window, or eat a zero. It was a vicious scenario designed to punish hesitation and separate technical spreadsheet shooters from true instinctive marksmen. Cora watched the men around her. The anxious ones ground their jaws. The confident ones kept their shoulders loose. Brody's face was twisted into a dark mixture of raw determination and boiling anger, a highly volatile emotional cocktail. Cora dropped prone in lane 7. The first target snapped up, offset to the right. Cora's iron sights locked onto it instantly. In the next breath, she processed the temperature and wind, not mathematically, but through a seamless synthesis of sensory data that only occurs when you've done something 10,000 times. She pulled the trigger. Hit. The second target leaped up much closer, moving aggressively. She adjusted her lead, trusting her gut. Hit. The third target was so far out it looked like a speck of dust, its movement painfully subtle. Distance plays a cruel trick on the human eye, creating the illusion of extra time. Cora ignored the illusion, trusted her firing solution, and let the heavy M14 roar. Hit. A strange, breathless sound drifted down from the observation deck, a collective, involuntary exhale that transcended language. When the extreme long-range targets began moving, the underlying physics became profoundly cruel. Through basic iron sights, the target practically disappeared behind the front post. Cora didn't rely on calculations. She relied on a deep ancestral rhythm vibrating in her chest. She fired. The scoring official keyed his radio. His voice sounded remarkably weak, squeezed out of a man who had entirely run out of professional responses. 10, center. By the time the brutal phase concluded, and Cora cleared her weapon, the atmosphere on the firing line had mutated. The morning had been defined by shock. This afternoon, the silence was suffocating. The sound of an entire ecosystem violently reordering its hierarchy. Chief Holden walked down the line, stopping squarely behind lane 7. He stared at Cora's card. Perfect score, he said softly. He looked up at her, offered absolutely nothing else, and walked away. Sometimes silence is the ultimate compliment. In lane 6, Brody Kincaid had missed 3 targets. In any other tournament, an elite hit rate like that would have commanded deep respect and earned commendations. Today, it was just second place. As Cora walked back to the barracks, she passed Brody in the staging area. Neither spoke, but Cora felt the heavy pressurized radiation of his silence. It wasn't defeat. It was the terrifying, compressed quiet of a deeply arrogant man who had been pushed into a corner and was rapidly deciding how to burn his way out. Her father had warned her about this exact phenomenon. The most dangerous moment isn't when your enemy openly screams his hatred for you. The absolute most dangerous moment is when a man who hates you suddenly goes quiet. That night, she stripped the M14 down and meticulously cleaned a weapon that didn't require cleaning. It was a religious meditation, proving that flawless excellence is never accidental. It is the direct product of unglamorous daily devotion to the absolute basics. As she lay in the dark, she heard the muffled sounds of the barracks settling. And then, from the room next door, she heard Brody speaking softly into a restricted mobile phone he absolutely was not supposed to possess. She couldn't make out the exact words. She didn't need to. She closed her eyes, anchored her mind to her father's memory, and slept. The precision game. The desert sun broke over China Lake violently. Cora was awake, her weapon already re-oiled, sitting in the dark, visualizing the wind. Brody stepped out of his room at dawn. She heard his heavy, deliberate boots pause outside her door for a brief moment before he marched away. She filed that microaggression away with the rest of her atmospheric data. The morning briefing introduced a pure precision test. Extreme distance. Smallest group wins. The competitors furiously dialed their premium optics consulting, highly advanced ballistic smartphone apps, and electronic wind meters, speaking in the clipped technical jargon of men who entirely outsourced their instincts to silicon chips. Cora stared down at her bare iron sights. She remembered being a little girl, the rifle standing taller than her as her father tapped the front metal post. That little piece of metal is brutally honest, Cora. It never lies to you. It doesn't magically add windage, and it doesn't take anything away. What you see through the iron is exactly what exists in the world. Learning to trust that reality, that's the entire job. When she asked why he didn't just buy a fancy glass scope like the other hunters, he smiled sadly. Because everyone else does. She finally understood. On the firing line, the crosswind was steady but deceitful. Cora took her time, not slow because being slow is often just hesitation wearing a mask of patience, but highly deliberate. She waited for the microscopic pause, perfectly situated between her own heartbeats, and fired. Center. Specialist Boone, the young ranger spotting her lane, blurted out in utter disbelief. Shot after shot, Cora dropped the heavy rounds into the exact same violent little neighborhood on the paper. By her fourth trigger pull, the entire range had gone dead. Men on the adjacent lanes had physically stopped shooting to watch her work. Brody fired twice, dropping solid 9s, but his excellent shots were completely ignored by a crowd captivated by a miracle. When the official measured her final grouping, Chief Holden stared at his clipboard. He looked out into the merciless desert, lost his iron-clad professional bearing entirely, and muttered, "Lord have mercy." Cora's entire 5-shot group fired at extreme range through bare iron in a howling crosswind could be covered by a man's thumb. The shockwave rippled down the line. Men argued with their own eyes. Brody loudly complained to anyone who would listen that she had simply gotten lucky with the wind timing. No one agreed with him. Their silence was its own damning verdict. Escalation. Late into the night, the sabotage escalated from petty to surgical. Cora opened her secured equipment locker to find her specialized ammunition case sitting exactly where she had left it, but noticeably lighter. Exactly 40 rounds had been expertly skimmed. Not enough to completely cripple her instantly, but perfectly calculated to leave her starving for ammo in the final phases. It was highly deniable, bureaucratic warfare.
She stood in the stark light of the armory, feeling the dark, familiar pressure of rage rising in her chest. She locked it down tightly. If you let the pressure vent in the wrong direction, you blow your own engine. She knocked on Marcus Cole's door. He handed her a sealed box of surplus ammunition without asking a single question.
"You already know exactly how this happened," he said grimly. "Whoever did this has master keys. You are the target."
"I know."
"You aren't reporting it."
If I report a ghost stealing 40 rounds, I look unhinged. If I wait, the pattern solidifies into a trap. Let them think I'm rattled. Cora paused, staring at the brass casings.
"It infuriates me. Not the theft, but the fact that I shot out of my mind today and their immediate institutional response is sabotage rather than basic respect. My father endured this poison his entire career. You'd think the military would have outgrown it by now."
Marcus looked away. His eyes grew incredibly old.
"When my grandfather rotated back from Vietnam, he couldn't get a single commanding officer to acknowledge the blood on his hands. He saved 4 men in a pitch-black firefight. You know what his official jacket says?"
Cora shook her head.
"Adequate under pressure." They called a miracle adequate.
Cora's voice dropped to a whisper.
My father's Silver Star recommendation magically vanished into the bureaucratic void during the withdrawal. They blamed lost paperwork. I only found out years after we buried him.
Marcus met her eyes.
"Is that the real reason you're standing on this base?"
"I am here because I am a lethal shooter," Cora stated fiercely.
"I earned my invitation. But yes, I am here because my father's name deserved to be spoken with reverence in rooms just like this. Since he couldn't be here himself to demand it, I brought his rifle to do the talking."
Before sunrise the following morning, her daily operational schedule mysteriously vanished from her locked room while she slept.
It was an escalation from material theft to intelligence warfare. Missing a phase meant automatic disqualification. She immediately went to Marcus, who had wisely created a duplicate schedule the night before, anticipating the strike. "Men like Brody don't invent new tactics," Marcus warned her. "They weaponize the exact same corrupt paperwork that has protected them for decades."
Armed with the schedule, Cora absolutely dominated the morning's cold bore challenge, dropping a shot dead center at an extreme, undocumented distance that practically defied the physical limitations of the human eye.
Up on the observation deck, Commander Vance refused to applaud. Instead, he turned to his aide. "Pull Captain Hayes' complete service record, and pull her father's original file from the archives. I don't care how deep it's buried. Get it."
During a brief recess, Chief Holden pulled Cora aside.
The grizzled veteran looked physically sick. He held out a small metal key.
"I found your locker key hidden inside the master logistics cabinet," Holden said softly.
"Someone on the administrative staff is aiding an active competitor to ruin you. I am handling this quietly so we can trap them. Do not let this break your focus."
"Thank you, Chief."
She didn't let it break her. During the grueling, heart-pounding, stress-fire obstacle course, Cora shot flawlessly while exhausted and fighting for breath. Brody, running on pure venom and panic, rushed his shot and dropped the terrible score.
He stared at her across the staging area, his face pale, realizing for the very first time that his arrogance had written a check his skills simply could not cash.
The truth unveiled. In the afternoon, Commander Vance summoned Cora to his private office. The small room smelled of gun oil and ancient secrets. 2 thick dossiers rested on his desk.
"Captain Hayes," Vance began gently, "how much do you actually know about what happened to your father during the war?"
The question hit Cora like a physical blow. "He told me it was a bloodbath. He said they were cut off, and he had to make shots in conditions he refused to ever speak of again. He said his rifle was the only reason his boys made it home.
Vance turned one of the heavily redacted files toward her. This is his original Silver Star recommendation, filed by Captain Silas Montgomery immediately following the action. It explicitly credits your father with saving 37 Marines via extreme sniper cover during a massive withdrawal under heavy fire. Cora stared at the faded typewriter-hammered text. I know. It was lost in the chaos. It wasn't lost, Vance corrected softly. Cora froze. I spent all night unearthing these files. Vance continued, his voice tight with suppressed anger. The recommendation safely reached the brigade commander. It was intentionally flagged and administratively buried because the recommending officer's account could not be corroborated by a second witness of sufficient rank. There were no officers left alive in the unit to corroborate it, Cora whispered. Exactly. The red tape was deliberately weaponized to deny him his glory. It was shoved into a drawer until everyone forgot. Vance closed the file firmly. I am telling you this now because of what I have watched you accomplish on my range. What you are doing out there isn't just peak performance. It is raw inheritance. You are wielding his ghost. Vance locked eyes with her. I have already contacted Naval Personnel Command. I am initiating a senior-level review to posthumously force this commendation through the system. I will ensure his name is permanently etched into the history it belongs to. Cora stared at the desk. The weight of her father's unacknowledged suffering, a bitter pill she had swallowed her entire life, suddenly felt lighter. It was finally being shared by a man with the power to rip the truth out of the shadows. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with an emotion she fought desperately to control. Go handle your business on the range, Vance ordered softly. Let me handle the bureaucracy. The storm. Deep in the night of the fourth day, the Pacific storm slammed into China Lake with the apocalyptic fury of a freight train. Driving horizontal rain obliterated the horizon, pushed by violently shifting winds. By morning, the range was a total washout. Targets past the mid-range point were completely invisible to the naked eye. The high-tech $40,000 electronic sniper systems utilized by the other elite operators began to fail catastrophically. Lenses fogged over. Ballistic computers short-circuited. Laser rangefinders spit out wildly inaccurate suicidal data. Cora held her M14. Iron doesn't short-circuit. Iron doesn't fog. Iron is older than the weather. Her father had dragged her out into blizzards for this exact scenario. The best time to learn to shoot is when you are entirely blind. That is when you discover if you truly possess the knowledge, or if you've just been relying on your shiny tools. Several top-tier shooters honorably withdrew their gear, rendered entirely useless. Brody Kincaid marched to the line, his face a mask of panicked desperation, holding a rifle that was actively fighting him. The rangemaster pushed the targets back to extreme distances. It was no longer a test of sight. It was a test of pure faith. Cora dropped into the freezing mud. She closed her eyes. She didn't look for the targets. She listened to the howling wind. She let her deep ancestral memory calculate the atmospheric pressure, the bullet drop, and the violent crosswinds. She fired strictly by feeling the rhythm of the squall. Hit, hit, hit. Up on the observation deck, rain lashing against his face, Admiral Sterling Cross lowered his binoculars. He turned to Commander Vance. I see it, the Admiral said, his voice trembling with absolute conviction. Make the call to the Pentagon, right now. Do not wait for the tournament to end. Make it while we are standing here, watching his daughter unleash hell on this range. Below them, Brody Kincaid missed target after target. His expensive technology had abandoned him, leaving only the man underneath. And the man underneath simply wasn't good enough. As Cora walked past him, Brody finally looked at her.
The toxic arrogance had been entirely stripped away, replaced by the hollow, devastating realization that he had been completely, utterly outclassed.
Cora didn't gloat. She didn't say a word. His silence was his own punishment. Later that afternoon, investigators quietly escorted Brody Kincaid and Major Langdon off the range. The conspiracy regarding the stolen ammunition and the missing schedules had been thoroughly unraveled by Chief Holden. Brody wasn't disqualified for missing shots. He was removed in absolute disgrace for attempting to rig a game he couldn't win. The legacy. The final morning broke crystal clear, the sky scrubbed violently clean by the storm. Commander Vance designed the ultimate championship phase cumulative fire, stretching out to a staggering maximum distance that the entire field considered mathematically impossible for an unassisted rifle. Cora lay prone in the dirt. Her mind was a perfectly still lake. She hit the early targets effortlessly. As the distance pushed toward the extreme limits of ballistics, the crowd on the observation deck swelled. Everyone on base abandoned their posts to witness history. At the final, impossible distance, the target was little more than a theoretical concept. The crosswind required a staggering holdover. A modern, computerized rifle had roughly a 40% chance of landing a hit. Cora was using raw steel and her own heartbeat. She closed her eyes. She felt the chill of the Montana morning. She felt her father's calloused hands resting gently over hers. She broke the trigger. For a heartbeat, the world hung suspended in absolute silence. Then the scoring radio erupted. Hit! Dead center! The observation deck exploded. It wasn't polite military applause. It was the raw, uncontainable roar of seasoned combat veterans losing their minds at the sight of a genuine miracle. Men who had spent their entire lives mastering violence screamed in pure, unadulterated awe. Admiral Cross gripped the railing, violently shaking his head, whispering to God. That evening, the entire base crammed into the formal assembly hall in full dress uniform. Cora stood at the front of the room, firmly clutching her father's scarred M14. Commander Vance took the podium. He didn't speak about bullet drop or windage. He spoke about legacy. He spoke about the unbreakable character required to do the right thing when the entire system is designed to crush you. Admiral Cross stepped forward, holding a velvet box. Staff Sergeant Elias Hayes, Vance's voice thundered through the silent hall, was recommended for the Silver Star for saving 37 lives in the bloodiest fighting of the war. That paperwork was buried by cowards. The failure belongs to the institution. The glory belongs entirely to him. Vance pulled the gleaming silver star from the velvet box and placed it directly into Cora's hand. Cora looked down at the heavy metal. She felt her father standing directly behind her, his hand resting heavily on her shoulder, just as it had in the freezing grass all those decades ago. The entire room rose to its feet. It wasn't a coordinated gesture. It was a spontaneous, overwhelming wave of absolute reverence. Hundreds of warriors standing at agonizing attention. Even Brody Kincaid, permitted to attend before facing his court-martial, stood in the back row. He met Cora's eyes and gave a single, slow nod of total surrender. Cora pressed the cold silver against her heart. She realized with a soul-deep clarity that she had never come to this base to break barriers or to prove her worth to men who hated her or to make history. She had come to finish what her father started, and she had. The rifle was securely in her hands. The metal rested over her heart. The room stood at absolute attention. And Staff Sergeant Elias Hayes of Hue City, Vietnam, was finally, irrevocably, and completely